Before we dive into today's episode, I wanted to tell you about this season's sponsors, Starboard, a brand that's been a huge support to us and a brand at the forefront of SUP racing for over 2 decades. If you watched any major races, you'll have seen their boards cutting through the field with their innovative designs and the distinctive colour of the board's nose. What sets Starboard apart is how seriously they've always taken racing. Their race boards aren't just fast, they're designed to be stable enough for newer racers to build confidence while still being competitive. Starboard work closely with world-class athletes to dial in their innovative designs, but they also understand that most of us are still learning and finding our racing legs. Plus, they're committed to sustainable manufacturing practices, which lines up with how most of us feel about protecting the waters we love to paddle. Their race boards and paddle collection has options for every level, and their website has detailed guidance which will help you find the right match for your experience and your racing goals. So if you're thinking about getting into racing or looking to step up your game, check out the Starboard website or just go along and check out the range at your local Starboard stockist, and all links to Starboard are in the show notes. Welcome to the SUP FM podcast, and we're now into the 10th year of this show, and we're celebrating that milestone with you and with another great selection of special guests and episodes to inspire you on and off the water. This is the second of 3 special episodes where we're diving into the world of SUP racing, and if you've ever wondered whether it's for you, then this is the perfect place to find out. First 2 episodes are for first-time racers or absolute beginners, and in the final episode of the 3, we focus on competing at an intermediate level of competition, which encompasses those who've moved on from that beginners category and who are taking their racing a little bit more seriously. So subscribe to the podcast and make sure they're downloaded to your device as soon as they're released. Now, building on the first episode for beginners, in this second episode, I'm delighted to be joined by Olympic gold medalist and legendary SUP coach Larry Cain, who shares his expert advice and his pearls of wisdom for new racers looking to build endurance, strength and technique. If you're waiting for the intermediate episode to arrive, don't ignore this one, because Larry positions some of those foundations which the intermediate approach is based on. These back-to-back episodes are a fantastic introduction to SUP racing, no matter your age, fitness level or paddle experience. So let's get into it. So I just wanted to ask you about the value of coaching for beginners. And as we know, in life and in SUP racing, you've got 2 choices. You can either learn purely from your own experiences, or you can learn from others who have done things before you. And the good thing about being coached by someone who knows the territory is that they've already done all the legwork, they've done the research, they've made the mistakes, and they've basically refined their processes. So as a coach, what would you say that someone providing that coaching could offer someone who is just starting off their SUP racing journey?
Oh, well, I think the benefits of having a coach, especially for somebody who's just starting, those benefits are enormous. You mentioned, somebody who's done the legwork and they can pass that experience on to the new athlete. That's very true. There's a lot of subtlety and complexity in a sport like paddling. And I used to think that sprint canoe was very complex, and SUP is much more complex because you're having to do what you do on both sides. You do it in such a wide variety of conditions as opposed to always flat water. It's a full body motion. There's no aspect that controls or limits the way you move, like there would be if you're in a rowing shell where you've got the oar locks and the slide of the seat, or if you're sitting on a bike and cranking away where you can really only push against the pedals in one way. In paddling, you've got such free range of motion, or all these different degrees of movement that you have to control. And so when you're new and you are trying to figure out how to do a sport like paddling, you really need, it really helps to have like a roadmap or a guide. And you can, if you choose not to get a coach, then you certainly need information, and you need quality information so that it can guide you in towards the path that you want to go. And I remember when I started paddling SUP, I scoured the internet looking for that information, and I really couldn't find it. So I had to use my canoe experience to figure out SUP. Unfortunately, they're very similar. And what I decided to do is I would write my own information for other people, since I didn't think that quality information existed. And, that was 15 years ago, and all that stuff has been refined, and I've reworked it. And all of that can be found at Paddle Monster. And it's a great tool to help the person who's sort of self-directed and is a do-it-yourself type person. But even with all that information, you need to have, really, if you really are interested in learning properly, you need to have guidance from somebody outside of your body, who can watch what you're doing, who can put context to the information. The information I create, I try to provide all the context as I'm creating it. So when somebody reads it, all the context is there. But there's still so many, like when I'm coaching somebody, I find that I need to have a dozen different ways to explain something, because what works for one, triggers something for one person doesn't necessarily do it for another. And so you need to have a bunch of different ways to explain a simple concept so that you can actually help that athlete make a connection. And coaching provides the athlete with the context that they need, even if they've done all of their homework and tried to learn themselves. And if you think about it, like paddling is or any complex sport motion, is the result of the muscles, the body, and the brain working together via the nervous system. And the nervous system will, you hear people talk about motor memory, and basically whatever you do, and every time you do it, if you do something, a repetitive motion again and again and again, you're laying a template for that movement onto your nervous system, right? So that what initially is something that you really have to think about as you paddle, in time becomes as automatic as walking down the sidewalk, right? And so, but when you start paddling, it's really beneficial if you start paddling properly, and if every stroke you take is a good stroke. And that can be hard to do if you don't have a coach working with you who can. In the ideal coaching scenario is where you have a coach beside you in a motorboat, like I had when I was in a canoe. It doesn't work as well in a lot of places, for SUP, unless I guess you're at a club in Spain where they have coaches at a club. But you can still accomplish the same things by working over Zoom or something like that, and looking at video together, and working weekly, looking at video and continually addressing things that an athlete needs to do better or differently, and so that over time that they're doing the right things, and they're imprinting good movement patterns on their nervous system rather than inferior movement patterns. And I just think that if you take somebody right from the beginning and you're teaching them the right movements, it's very unlikely that they're ever going to have to unlearn bad habits or relearn how to paddle. They're going to be doing it properly from the start. And the last thing I'll leave you with is that, back in 2004, a friend of mine who paddles kayak was racing at the Olympics in Athens. And before he left, I remember one of the sports scientists that had been working with him but wasn't making the trip to Athens left him like a note, but like in an email. And one of the things he reminded him was to paddle with spectacular technique all the time. And I really drive this home with the athletes that I coach, especially when they've finished a workout. So most people think about trying to paddle with really effective technique while they're doing their work. But imagine you finish a workout, you're 10 minutes, 15 minutes away from shore, and you got to get to shore. And you're tired, but you got to paddle to shore. A lot of people paddle, they just dip and paddle poorly. They're not thinking anymore about paddling well because they've just overloaded their body and their mind trying to do a workout really well. And so they paddle poorly back to shore. And what they're doing is they're just confusing their nervous system. They work so hard for, say, an hour to, lay down good movement patterns, to consolidate good movement patterns. And then they paddle like trash going back to shore. And to a degree, they're lousing that up. And so, when the last strokes you take before you step off your board and back onto shore are the ones your body remembers the most for the next training session.
Exactly.
And so you want to make them really good. And so, I've digressed a lot in the answer, but for the beginner paddler, the benefit of having a coach is that you've got someone who can help you more frequently take very good strokes, to learn a good technique about why you want to paddle the way you are being, guided to paddle. But to help them take more good strokes than poor strokes, because that's the way they're going to develop a technique that's like a default, it's second nature, that will be effective and that will be one that they can rely on for the rest of their paddling days.
Yeah.
Whereas if they don't have the benefit of that coach working with them, they're just going to, they're going to be going in and out of good paddling and not really realizing when they're paddling well, when they're not. And they're much more likely if, a season later or a couple of seasons later, they decide they want to get really serious about it. They're much more likely in that case to have to sort of deconstruct their technique, unlearn bad habits, and then relearn how to paddle well. And to me, that just seems like a waste when you could have started to do things well right from the beginning.
Absolutely right. I mean, so much in there. But just going back to beginners, obviously learning curves are curves for a reason. It's that early opportunity to shape your technique and you get the best bang for your buck from the coach, I guess, because there's so much there that you can adapt. And really interesting what you said about the learning, because as we know, brain, what fires together, wires together, habit sort of generates over time. And I guess if your form deteriorates towards the end of that session, not only does that set your starting point for the next, but also gives you subconscious permission to drop your technique when you're feeling tired. And in a race situation, that's exactly when you need it.
Yeah, I mean, 100% that's true. I mean, I think, honestly, like a beginner athlete is less likely to experience that, decay of technique at the end of a hard workout because probably they're not training as hard. I mean, I think that working on paddling well with good technique should start from day one. But doing workouts doesn't necessarily start from day one.
Mm-hmm.
That might start, a number of months down the road once you've sort of consolidated a technique that you can maintain for a workout, right?
Brilliant.
And the other thing too is a lot of beginners step on a board and they don't have the ability to. I see very fit people come to paddling from other sports, and they get on a board and they try to do a workout, and they can't even hit the same training zones because they haven't learned how to paddle well enough to make their body, make their body work hard enough to hit the training zones, like that. So they're almost better off continuing to do their fitness work in a land-based activity while they're learning, really methodically learning to paddle well from a technical perspective on the water. And then as their technique reaches a point where it's stable and effective, it will be much easier for them to then, do workouts and get a good training effect from them.
Oh, that's really interesting. This brings us very nicely on to the next bit that I wanted to discuss with you, because I know that what you often talk about is the 3 pillars of physical training, which is technique, aerobic fitness, and strength and power endurance. Mm-hmm. So from a beginner's perspective, you've talked a bit about how vital technique is. If we can just take that apart a bit, just at a surface level, what are the core principles of good SUP technique that every beginner should really be mastering first?
Well, it's really interesting. I don't think that anyone should be looking at a top level paddler and saying, I want to paddle exactly like that. There's so many great top level paddlers. Who do you choose to exactly mimic? It's confusing because they all look a little bit different. And B, you're not that person. So say if, for example, somebody wanted to copy Connor Baxter. Well, they're not Connor Baxter, right? I think the thing for any beginner to realize that we're all different shapes and sizes. And even if you took 2 individuals of the same height and weight, if you measured them anthropometrically, where you're starting to measure, distance of, or the length of long bones, like the length of their femur or the length of their humerus in their upper arm, or their the length of their bones from their elbow to their wrist, or, when you started to look at them at that level, you'd find that 2 people of the same height and weight were very different. But you can even take it a step further. You can look at where muscles connect on bone across joints. And some people, where their muscles connect allow them to be very strong in a pulling motion, and some people in a gym are very strong in a pressing motion. Some people have a greater preponderance of fast twitch muscle fibers. Some people have a greater preponderance of slow twitch muscle fibers. Some people have a very highly developed aerobic system. Some people, their aerobic system isn't as well developed, but they're extremely powerful. We've all got our own unique physical toolkit. And so the person we should be trying to paddle like is ourselves. But there's, you asked about principles of technique that you're trying to master or accomplish. Well, I think there are 6 of them. And the first is simply the recognition that what makes our board move through the water is that we gather water on our blade. Our blade enters the water, and we gather water. We feel like every molecule of water possible loading up on that blade, and then we hold it there. And then what we're essentially doing is we're pulling ourselves to the paddle and then pushing ourselves past the paddle. And that's what moves us forward. And the degree to which we can do that effectively is really going to determine how fast we end up going. The second principle I would say is that a beginner should be thinking about trying to find a way to use big muscles preferentially over smaller muscles. So that would mean trying to find a way to engage muscles between their chest and their knees, because those are the big muscles in your body. So your legs, the muscles that cross your hips, which is the most heavily muscled joint in the body. To a lesser degree, the muscles in your back, your chest, and obviously your core. Your arms are basically connectors between the load that you have on your paddle blade and those big muscles in the center of your body. The third principle I would say that paddlers should be concerned with is trying to use their body weight. So body weight is useful in 2 different ways. The first is that the force of gravity acting on your body weight can create additional force that you can apply to the paddle, or the load that is held on the paddle, and it complements what you're doing with your big muscles, right? So it multiplies your strength or your power, essentially. The other thing that body weight does is that if you're getting body weight off of the board and onto your paddle, it makes the board sit a little bit lighter in the water, and therefore have less resistance to forward movement through the water. The fourth principle that I think is important is to think about your blade angle. When I was coaching with the national canoe team, we had devices that we could put on the boats, and it would show us not only the speed, etc., but also the acceleration. And we could actually get a profile of an individual stroke and what an acceleration profile for an individual stroke. And what we saw was that when the blade enters the water with a positive blade angle, acceleration starts to immediately increase very rapidly. It peaks when the blade is at or close to vertical, and then acceleration declines rapidly as the blade passes through vertical into a negative blade angle. The canoe is still accelerating, but at a rapidly decreasing rate of acceleration. And I put that same mechanism onto a paddleboard, and the stroke profile is exactly the same. It's just that the acceleration, because it's a slower craft, isn't quite as steep. And what that tells you is that you want to be maximizing time with the blade in the water where the paddle blade is positive through to vertical, and especially you want to try to maximize the time where the blade is at or close to vertical. And you want to minimize the time where the blade is negative and getting increasingly negative. So you hear people say, pull the blade out at your feet. I don't think that is a hard and fast rule. Some people pull it out a little in front of their feet. Some people pull it out just a little bit behind their feet. But what you don't want to do is have the paddle dragging way behind you in the water with an ever increasing negative blade angle, because that acceleration curve for a stroke shows that the stroke is really ineffective back there. And you're much better off getting the blade out and starting a new stroke where you're getting heaps of acceleration again, right? That's what's going to make you go faster. The fifth principle is, in my opinion, is to try to maximize the run of the board between strokes. And so in flat water, that means, running a level board, a smooth board. When you're out in the ocean, that's really hard to do. Or if you're technical racing, it's really hard to do because there's so much going on and your board's wobbling and shaking. And so I don't worry so much about the smooth board. In canoe, that was a very big thing, but I don't worry so much about it in stand-up paddling. But what I really am concerned with is circling back to the first principle, which is the second half of that, which is keeping the load on your blade and pushing yourself past the paddle off of the exit. Because if you execute that well, your board gets a big boost of acceleration off the back of the stroke, carries more speed between strokes, which makes you faster, right, over a distance. But it also makes the next catch easier because your board is slowed down less. And then the sixth principle is basically trying to do things with direct movements, because direct movements are going to be faster and more powerful. And obviously, in terms of being faster, cadence is important in our sport. And so, you see people like take the blade out of the water and they got a big swingy slow motion in the air. That's not as effective as pushing the board off the exit, getting your body into the position, your body into the position it should be at the next catch. And then all you have to do is extend your arms and rotate your shoulders and you're ready for the next stroke, right? So that's what I mean by direct movements. So if I'm working with a beginner, I explain this to them. I tell them that they're trying to paddle like the best version of themselves, and they're trying to accomplish these things. And then as a coach, my job is to help them find ways to accomplish those things in the best way possible. And the last thing I'll say is that when I do look at all the top paddlers, and I follow them all on social media, and I'm constantly doing screen captures of them so that I can look to see what they're doing. And I can also use them as exemplars when I'm teaching. And what I've found is that even though they all look different as they're paddling, as you see them paddling by or as you see them paddling towards you, and it's interesting, when you stand on shore, I'm sure you've done this many times, right? You stand on shore and you look up the course and you see people paddling down towards you. And you know who's in the race. And you kind of know what Connor looks like the way he paddles. And you know the way Michael Booth looks like the way he paddles. And you know the different characters. And you know that they all kind of have a unique look as they're paddling towards you. And you can pick them out from a distance. But the really interesting thing is that if you look at them on video and you look at them frame by frame, each of them you will find there's 3 points in the stroke where they almost look identical. Their bodies are passing through an almost identical position to the point where if I could find a way to take that silhouette of their body in the video and lift it off the video for each of them and put it onto like a blank piece of paper or something, I would find that if I put them over top of each other, they would almost totally shadow each other. Like it's uncanny how they are in the same positions. It's the thing that makes them look different is how they connect the dots between those positions. And so that provides a coach with a very powerful tool for teaching technique, because you can get a paddler to learn those positions on land where they don't have they're not worried about wobbling and their balance and that type of thing, and where they can really lean on the paddle, because the paddle won't move on land, and feel in their muscles what that position feels like. And then when they've learned those positions, it's much more likely that they're going to be able to find those positions and pass through them on the water. And then, when you remind them that they're of the things they're trying to accomplish with their body and their paddle, and as they're passing through these positions, they end up connecting the dots between these positions in their own way, in a way that that allows them to achieve those 6 fundamental principles in the best way possible for them. And suddenly they've developed their own technique. And that's very much how I learned to paddle canoe when I was a 12, 13-year-old kid. So it was from looking at pictures of the top athletes, putting them into arraying the pictures around me by the position that they were in the stroke. So all of the catch or setup photos were over on my left. The middle of the pull photos were kind of in front of me, and the exit photos would be on my right. And I take a broom, because the broomstick was about the same length as my paddle shaft, and the straw bristles of the broom would flex a bit when I leaned on it, like a paddle going into I would simulate a paddle going into the water. And I get in front of the full-length mirror at my parents' house, and I would look at the pictures, and then I would look at myself in the mirror and put my body in the exact precise position that I saw these athletes in. And I would do that for each position in the stroke. And, I learned how to paddle with really effective technique in a canoe at a really young age, which really accelerated my development and allowed me as a junior to be racing, effectively internationally against seniors. And so that same principle of, finding these positions on land makes it applies to SUP and makes it much easier for anybody, but in particular beginners, to learn an effective technique on their board.
I've been a fan of Oscar Propulsion well before they became a sponsor on the podcast, because I felt the effect of their clever technology when I was first handed one by a friend to try. Their new Flow Force paddle is the best yet and is extremely lightweight, and while it might seem a bit counterintuitive having cuts or slits in the blade, the hydrodynamics of this have been tested scientifically. From the very first stroke, it just felt right. It eliminated any paddle flutter and really gripped the water securely. The tech is designed to reduce the impact on your body by balancing the force distribution. It makes the stroke feel lighter, but it converts more of your effort into pure forward motion, meaning less fatigue and more efficiency. It's about making your time on the water more effective, helping you spend more time paddling and reducing recovery time. This is serious, innovative and game-changing technology which really makes an immediate difference. If you're curious about technology that helps you enjoy paddling more while being kinder to your body, then head over to the Oscar Propulsion website, where you can learn more and see the exciting brand new Flow Force paddles. And if you see me on the water, please ask me, because I'd be very happy to lend you mine, but I do want it back. Thank you to Flow Force from Oscar Propulsion for their support for the show. Go to oscarpropulsion.com or follow the link in the show notes to find out more. This episode is supported by Paddle UK, the national governing body for stand-up paddling in the UK, and the team behind one of the biggest and most exciting racing opportunities on the horizon. In 2026, the ICF Stand-Up Paddling World Cup is coming to the UK for the very first time on the sparkling waters of the English Riviera in Torbay. And it's a major moment for British SUP and a chance for international competitors to race on a world-class stage which is set against a spectacular backdrop that rivals any global venue. And if you're aiming to be there, whether you're racing for your country or for your personal best, the best time to prepare is now. The 2025 Super Festival, happening this September, will offer the perfect tune-up, elite-level conditions, coastal race formats, and a dry run at the exact venue that will be hosting the World Cup next year. So whether you SUP for fun or are competing for medals, come and join us early for a multi-day festival of SUP and get race ready on the Riviera. You can find out more about the Paddle UK Super Festival and the World Cup in 2026 by clicking the link in the show notes. My next question was going to be around those land-based drills. I think you've covered all of those now, but I think in terms of innovation, you're one of the few people who I've seen really focus on those land-based drills, because obviously no matter how much we might want to, we can't be on the water all the time. So you can establish that muscle memory that we talked about earlier on by just practicing that on the land. I think just in terms of you informing yourself as a child on the correct technique, that shows that you've got a lifelong coaching focus. If you can coach yourself at that age, then that's pretty special. But I just wanted to talk about one aspect of the technique and the seven, which is sort of broadly counterintuitive, which is that loading up the paddle and leaning forward. And it's quite similar in a way to running technique, where the angle of your body where you're falling forward, it's very much sort of counterintuitive. And I guess for new paddlers as well, you need a degree of confidence in order to do that, because essentially you're placing your body weight on your paddle on an unstable surface, which is water, in order to get that progression. I guess that takes a bit of practice before you get that right, or are we just talking about sort of a very moderate lean in order to get that catch?
Well, I think it obviously takes practice, right? And it takes, time to establish comfort on the board, and more importantly, trust in your paddle that it's going to support your body weight. But I think the starting point is ankle flexion, right? If you think about, for those of your viewers who have done alpine skiing, when you put on those alpine ski boots, they're very uncomfortable. And the reason they're uncomfortable is they have you in like, there's the sole of your foot and there's your shin. You're not standing like you do in your street shoes. You're leaning forward with ankle flexion in those boots. And the reason ski boots are like that is because good skiing requires you to have your weight over the ski tips rather than the tails of the skis, because that allows you to carve your turns more easily. And it's much easier to keep your hips forward and thus your body weight more forward if you have ankle flexion. And so I think the starting point on a board is ankle flexion, to encourage somebody to think about their knees being over their toes. The next thing is to encourage them to keep their hips forward a little bit if they can. I like to, if I'm looking at video, I'll always look at the back of a paddler's butt and sort of draw an imaginary line down to their heels. And, I'm looking to see that their hips are kind of level with their heels, or maybe slightly ahead of their heels, as opposed to having their butt stuck way out behind them as they're about to enter the water, because that puts their weight squarely over their feet. But if you can start with ankle flexion, then think about maybe just squeezing your glutes a bit to push your hips forward a little bit more, or keep your hips forward a bit more. Then all you got to do is rotate your shoulders and lean your upper body a bit, and you're leaning forward right from your feet. And yes, that's a very uncomfortable position to stand in. And most of us will topple over if we try to stand in that position. But once you realize that the paddle will support you when it goes in the water, and develop that trust in the paddle, suddenly that makes your catch extremely effective for two reasons. The first is that little bit of instability that you're in the position that you're passing through encourages you to get your blade in the water and fully loaded, completely buried more quickly, right? So that it will support your body weight. And then the second thing that it does is that it's ensuring that you're getting that little bit extra body weight on the paddle immediately at the catch. So you're not just bending at the waist and trying to get, somebody who sticks their bum out behind them and bends at the waist. If you stood with ankle flexion, but your bum out behind you and you were leaning over from the waist, your weight would be balanced over your feet, because the weight of your head and shoulders forward is being balanced by your bum sticking out behind you. But if you can bring those hips forward, so now all of a sudden you're kind of leaning forward right from your feet, you're in a much less stable position. But the blade will support your body weight. You're passing through that position as you're paddling very quickly, and the blade is going to take your body weight.
Yeah.
And so, and if you aren't leaning forward right from your feet, then the weight that you get on your blade is really coming from your waist up, or even it's just, from your rib cage up.
Mm.
But if you're leaning forward right from your feet, you're actually getting a little bit of your body weight, below your waist onto the paddle too. And the other thing is, if you're keeping your hips forward while you do that, then when the blade is set and fully loaded, those hips are available for a much greater distance now to work in the loading phase of the pull than they would be if you started with the blade entering the water with your hips out behind you, right? So there's benefits to the catch by being in that leaning forward position, and there's benefits that you'll experience in the pull as well. And the last thing I'll say about it is, if you watch the top athletes sprinting, you'll see they're all aggressively leaning forward. Now, when you see them out in bigger water, you don't see that as much, because that is harder to do in bigger water. And technique is harder to learn in bigger water as well, right? But, to some degree, everyone lets their bum creep out behind them a bit more the rougher the water gets, as just a way to maintain stability. So, I recognize that what you see in somebody doing in flat water in a sprint is not quite the same as you see them doing in a distance race in the ocean in big water. But I do believe that the better you do this in flat water, the more effective your technique is still going to be in rough water, if you've got, the stability skills. And the last thing I'll say too, by the way, is most recently I saw a post, Michael Booth was doing a clinic somewhere in Europe, and he had people working in the catch and the setup and catch on land. And he was talking about how easy it is to teach somebody, the proper position that they want to be in on the water on land. So, it's the idea of teaching people on land I think is something that a good coach, and I consider Michael to be a good coach, is something that is very familiar, I think, to a good coach.
Absolutely. And the benefit of a good coach, as we say, is that they give you opportunities to be able to do the right work at the right time. And as we said, if we're not on the water all the time, not all of us can spend our life on the water and wish we could, but you just take whatever opportunity you can, and that's part of the coach's role. So we talked there about technique for beginners. There are also a couple of other main pillars, and as you mentioned, technique is the thing really that beginners should spend a lot of time working on. But just to cover sort of aerobic fitness, I think possibly we are quite familiar with aerobic fitness, but I guess there are particular demands for paddling, and it's something as well that's really important for recreational paddlers as well as athletes. So on the water, off the water, brief sessions, what sort of pastimes off the water would be most applicable to paddling, and what fitness sessions would you recommend when people are on the water?
So, a lot of the people I coach at Paddle Monster are off the water for most of the winter, like I was when I used to paddle canoe. Their lakes are frozen over, their rivers are frozen over. They don't live near an open body of water. My message to them is all is not lost. Like, you can do really productive things for your paddling when you're stuck on land. And we talked about land drills, and that's part of it. Watching good people paddle and seeing what they do, and using that as the way to inspire what you're doing in your land drills, and visualizing how those land drills transpose to paddling will all help your technique. But the big thing that you can do when you're frozen off the water is work on your fitness, both your strength and your fitness. By fitness, I mean your energy systems, your aerobic ability, and to a lesser degree, your anaerobic fitness. And the reality is, I believe that you can actually develop your aerobic fitness to a higher level in land-based activities than you can on the water, by virtue of the fact that not all land-based activities are created equally, or not all activities are created equally. Um, Activities that use the greatest amount of muscle mass are going to load your oxygen delivery system, which is your cardiorespiratory system, much more than activities that only require a small amount, a comparatively small amount of muscle mass. So any activity that uses your legs to a high degree, because your legs are the biggest, you think of your quads and your hamstrings, they're the biggest muscle in the body. Any activity that uses them to a large degree is going to create a very high demand for oxygen being delivered to those muscles. And, so if you think about an activity like running or even cycling, there's some wonderful machines in gyms like stair treadmills and things like that, where you use your legs to a really high degree. Cross-country skiing for people that are frozen off the water in the winter is tremendous. It's a full body exercise. I'm not as keen on a rowing erg, even though it's heavily into the legs. And I'm not as keen about it simply because the cadence is often really slow, but it can be really effective too. But these are all activities where you use your legs likely to a greater degree than you ever will when you're paddling on a paddleboard, even if you use your legs a lot when you're paddling. And so you can much more easily load your ability to, or train your ability to deliver oxygen on these land-based activities than you can when you're paddling. So I do recommend for people to take, in the off season, as much as there is an off season in stand-up paddling, the off season from, say, beginning of December through till, maybe the middle of March if you're getting on the water late, or if you get on the water early, maybe the middle of January, tail end of January. I do recommend that people paddle a little bit less and do a little bit more of this land-based aerobic work, because I think it's going to help them develop their fitness to a higher level. And then when you start to increase your paddling, you're starting with a higher level of aerobic fitness than you otherwise would have. And now you can sort of start to convert that fitness to the paddling motion, right? The side benefit is, if you're doing a lot of leg-based activity for your aerobic work, you're going to have really strong legs when you get on your board, or great endurance in your legs. And that's an important thing, because as soon as you lose your legs when you're paddling, you're finished, right? So any of those activities works really well. And you don't have to go crazy, doing really intense intervals to develop aerobic fitness. You can do it at level 2, which is relatively, easy, a comfortable pace. And what really matters for your base aerobic ability is duration in training zone more than the intensity. So you can build a really effective base just by putting in the hours in level 2 or low level 3, doing cycling, running, cross-country skiing, swimming, all these different land-based activities, as well as on your paddleboard. We do need higher level aerobic activities when we're paddling, and so there are times where you want to change the main stimulus in the training program and work at a higher intensity. This is where you start to get into what beginners but fitness buffs know as like high intensity interval training. But that has a very big place as well. But you can easily develop your fitness to a high level on land. And I counsel a lot of beginners while they're getting their technique organized to to do their main fitness work on land. And then as their technique sort of becomes consolidated and they're able to do workouts, now they can start to do more of their aerobic work on their board and less of it on land. And going out for a nice steady aerobic paddle I find most beginners really like that, because being on the water is such a unique place, a wonderful place compared to being, on a piece of cardio equipment at a gym.
Absolutely.
Right? So,
you get the social contact, you get out there in nature, and also get to practice your technique at the same time.
For sure. And that there's a lot of things I like about being on the water. It's the wind blowing through your hair, the breeze in your face, the little ripples in the water, and hearing the sound of the board tinkle, 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 tinkle going across the little ripples. The sound the board makes when you're paddling well. Yeah. The nose wave changes color, and it makes a louder noise as your board accelerates. The sound of the paddle entering the water cleanly. These are all things that I love about paddling. And I find most people really enjoy that too, because it's such a out in nature thing. And as you say too, you're working on your technique while you're working on your fitness. So you're killing two birds with one stone.
I just wanted to cover a bit around strength and power endurance. And you've already said that this probably shouldn't be as much of a focus, particularly when you start, but it's useful from the standpoint of variable conditions. If you're sort of flogging upwind maybe, or you need to do a bit of a sprint to sort of catch up to the wake of the board in front of you, there's all sorts of reasons why you need that sort of additional power up. And you mentioned that it's all of the big muscles, the legs and the back and the core and so on, which tend to be those muscles that you need to train up. Are there any sort of basic exercises that you'd recommend that people just follow just to improve their conditioning, and preferably without sort of huge amounts of gym equipment? I guess there's quite a lot of isometric type exercises that people can do in order to build those key muscles up, or at least maintain them.
Yeah, I do believe that the best place to build your strength is on land. Ideally in a gym, because you've got all kinds of equipment at your disposal. But Paddle Monster, we have a home strength program for people that don't have access to a gym, and it includes a lot of it might require a minimal investment in some equipment like exercise balls, medicine balls, maybe a TRX strap that you can hang from a doorway and do certain things with. But during COVID, when all the gyms were closed over here, I used to go to the schoolyard or the park where they had those jungle gym things for kids. And you could find a place on them to do pull-ups or chin-ups. You could find a place on them to do what I call body rows, where there would be a low bar, like a sort of a waist height or between waist and knee height. And you can hang from that with your arms extended facing the bar and your legs out in front of you, and keep your body straight. And you pull up your chest up to the bar, and then, extend your arms again. That's the exact same thing as what you could do in a gym on a rowing machine, but you're just using your body weight. Push-ups, any type of push-up with your feet elevated, so you can change the load. There's a ton of different core exercises that you can do without the benefit of gym equipment. So all of these things are really beneficial for building the strength. And strength plays a big role in stand-up paddling because, first of all paddle sports require a lot of strength. But stand-up paddling in particular does, partly because the boards are fatter and shorter and there's more resistance to them moving through the water. But the big reason is simply because of the fact that we're standing. It means that our bottom hand, is farther from the load on our blade. And that puts us at a leverage disadvantage. Imagine being out in your garden with the long-handled shovel, and instead of having your bottom hand right near the blade of the shovel, where you can lift a lot of dirt and, feel really strong, imagine having your hands really close together. You can't lift anything, right? And so it's that principle that applies to stand-up paddling. We're standing, we're farther from the water than we would be in a in a racing canoe or certainly in an outrigger canoe. So our hand is farther from the load on the blade. We need to be strong to work dynamically against that load. And so investing some time in your land-based strength work is really important. And then when you get onto your board, you've got essentially more horsepower. And so now what you can do is you can more easily learn to make your technique that you've been working so hard on, that, you know, that good motion, that is that effective motion that is addressing those 6 fundamental principles that you're trying to achieve. You can do it. You can start to learn to do it more explosively, with more pop, you know, in each stroke. And you can basically work a little bit more quickly with the water held on your blade than the board is moving, like, or you a little bit more quickly than you currently do as the board is moving. So you can end up accelerating the board more, right? And so, you know, it's very learning to paddle with power and to do your explosive, you know, power work on the water is important for learning to, as you say, you know, be able to catch up to a draft train, have good speed off the start. If you're doing a sprint, to pull yourself onto a wave if you're out in the ocean, right? These are it's very important to be strong and to have that pop in your stroke. But the place to build the foundation for that is really on land. And then you learn, then you have the horsepower to do it on the water. And now you have to learn to do your normal paddling motion more explosively, right? And there's a bit of a learning curve to that. But so that's kind of how I view strength factoring in to paddling and learning, and how you kind of learn to paddle more explosively.
A huge thank you to Larry from Paddle Monster for joining us on the show. And in the final episode of the 3, we focus on competing at an intermediate level of competition, encompassing those who have moved on from that beginners category and who are taking their racing a little more seriously. If you enjoyed this episode, the best way you can support us is by telling just one friend about our show. And you can also help us keep the podcast afloat by visiting our sponsors, and you'll find their links and details in the show notes. Don't forget to subscribe or follow the show so you never miss an episode. And until next time, take care, and we'll see you on the water.